You know, we've all lived through the massive, world-altering disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what if the next global crisis looked, well, completely different? Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating analysis that compares the pandemic to a hypothetical 2026 conflict in the Persian Gulf. And what it reveals is that not all global shocks are created equal, not by a long shot.
Okay, so let's get right to the core of it. The whole idea here is actually pretty simple, but it has huge implications. The pandemic was what economists call a demand shock. It was all about our ability or our willingness to buy things. But this hypothetical 2026 conflict, that's a supply shock, and that's a totally different beast. The problem isn't a lack of customers, it's a sudden, catastrophic inability to make or move the stuff we all need. So, to really get a handle on this, we've got to first break down what these terms actually mean in the real world. And we'll start with the one we're all, unfortunately, very familiar with, the demand shock that was the pandemic.
Right, a demand shock. It's all about the consumer side of the economy. I mean, just think back to early 2020. Lockdowns hit. Suddenly, restaurants, movie theaters, stores, they were all closed. We stopped traveling. We stopped commuting. The demand for just countless services and goods, it just fell off a cliff. And that's exactly why governments started rolling out stimulus checks, right? They were trying to artificially prop up that collapsed demand and get the economy moving again.
Now, a supply shock is the mirror opposite. The problem isn't that people don't want to buy things. It's that the things they want to buy physically cannot be made or delivered. You want to buy gas for your car, but the oil tankers are literally stuck in a port and can't move. That's a supply shock. It's a crisis of availability. And here's the key. You can't fix that by just printing more money. It doesn't matter how much cash you have. If the gas station is empty. Now, to be fair, the pandemic was a bit more complicated than just one thing. It definitely started as a classic demand shock. But as you can see here, it evolved. When the world started to reopen, all that pent-up demand came roaring back and just slammed into supply chains that were a complete mess. That created all those bottlenecks and shortages we remember, and that's when inflation really took off. It was that slow, grinding shift from a demand problem to a supply problem.
Okay, so let's pivot to that 2026 scenario. Because this crisis starts in a completely different way. Not with a virus spreading silently across the globe, but with the sudden, violent closing of one of the most critical arteries of global trade on the entire planet.
This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? The Strait of Hormuz is pretty much the jugular vein for the global energy market, and that extreme narrowness makes it incredibly vulnerable. This is ground zero. This is the epicenter of the entire supply shock.
And the impact is instantaneous and absolutely historic. We're talking 11 million barrels of oil a day, just gone, vanished from the global market overnight. Now, to put that number in perspective for you, that is more oil taken offline than during the 1973 oil embargo and the 1979 Iranian Revolution combined. It's completely unprecedented. And this number just shows you the sheer scale of the paralysis. This isn't just a slowdown, it's a near total shutdown. A 97% drop in traffic means the world's most important energy highway is, for all intents and purposes, closed. You've got almost 3,000 ships just stuck, waiting. It's a full-stop economic heart attack.
So here's the thing. When you shut down a critical choke point like this, the problem doesn't stay local. It's not contained. It immediately sets off this cascade of consequences, these ripple effects that spread across the entire global economy. And that first ripple is financial. Look at this spike. The cost to insure a ship going anywhere near that area goes from a tiny fraction of a percent to a staggering 10% of the ship's entire value. It just makes it completely prohibitively expensive to even think about sending a vessel through there. And that financial shock immediately translates into real-world pain for regular people everywhere. This isn't some abstract problem for Wall Street. We're talking about countries all over the globe being forced to ration fuel. Sri Lanka using QR codes, the Philippines declaring a national energy emergency. This gets real for real people really fast. And you have to understand this isn't just about oil, it's so much bigger. The Gulf region also ships out a third of the entire world's traded nitrogen fertilizer. You choke that off, you're not just creating a fuel crisis, you're launching a direct attack on global food production. That creates a terrifying feedback loop between energy prices and food prices. And then you get the really weird, unexpected knock-on effects that nobody saw coming. Like this one, which is just wild.
A huge portion of the world's helium supply is trapped on these ships, and it's literally just evaporating, boiling off into the atmosphere, gone forever. You might think, helium for balloons? No. We need helium for making semiconductors, for running MRI machines. A shortage here could grind high-tech manufacturing and medical diagnostics to a halt. And the aviation industry? It gets hit by a triple whammy. Jet fuel prices double, some of the world's biggest and busiest air hubs are shut down, and the huge fleets of airlines like Emirates and Qatar are essentially grounded. In just the first 24 hours, you could have up to 200,000 passengers stranded worldwide. And if you could actually find a flight, fares on some routes jumped by an unbelievable 900%. The economic damage is just staggering. In the first month alone, the region loses an estimated $186 billion. But behind that massive number is a human catastrophe. That economic collapse is projected to push an additional 4 million people into poverty. That's the real cost.
So here's the thing. A shock to the system this huge, it doesn't just go away. Things don't just snap back to the way they were. It forces a permanent, fundamental shift in how the entire world thinks about trade and supply chains. It basically marks the beginning of a whole new era.
And this slide just nails that philosophical shift. For decades, the global economy ran on just-in-time. It was all about maximum efficiency, lowest possible cost, almost zero extra inventory. But what we learned is that just-in-time is incredibly fragile. The future has to be just in case. The new priority is resilience. It's about building in redundancy, having strategic buffers, and being ready to weather the next storm. And this all leads to 4 huge long-term changes. First, as we said, the end of just-in-time. Resilience becomes priority number 1. Second, the shift to renewables goes into hyperdrive, because dependence on fragile fossil fuel supply lines is now seen as a massive national security risk. Third, you see permanent trade rerouting as new, safer corridors are developed. And finally, kind of ironically, the Gulf region itself is forced to pivot from just being an oil supplier to becoming a crucial global logistics hub in this new world. So what this all really boils down to is this: the age of optimizing everything purely for cost, for maximum efficiency, is over. The brutal lesson of a supply shock is that security, stability, and resilience, they all have a price. And that forces us to ask a really fundamental question about the future of our interconnected world. Are we actually willing to pay it?